Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth-generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone. For today's episode, I want to talk about wheat, and particularly some of our small grains. We had wheat, rye, and triticale this year, and we just wrapped up that harvest. And I really enjoy that, the different small grains, especially the wheat. That's what we've been doing for quite a few years now. I enjoy that partially because not many people around here do it. There are some growers that do it, but I sometimes just enjoy doing things that are different outside of the normal, outside of the maybe corn, soybeans rotation. And so that's why I wanted to, we just wrapped that up. Just wanted to kind of go over some of the yields that we had. Like I said, we had wheat, rye, and triticale. Triticale, for those that don't know, is basically a cross between rye and wheat, and they each kind of have their uses. And so I want to kind of discuss how things went this year and really kind of dive into this. This is going to be a little bit of a different episode in that I'm not strictly talking mindset or strictly talking business and different things to do that of that nature. But I'm talking about something that I'm pretty passionate about, and that's honestly raising crops and trying to be profitable in that regard, and different things that we can do with the crops and basically with the soil, and we'll kind of get into that. So just to kind of let you know, basically this year was very good for us. Our wheat did, kind of dive into things, our wheat yielded 108 bushels per acre, which is honestly a record for us. And I want to preference, before I get into the rest of this, I want to preference by saying, as I go through this and I'm talking about yields especially, I'm not trying to say this in a bragging way. I'm not trying to say this in a boastful way, because I'm honestly just happy with how everything went. And really, as a farmers, I just feel like, especially when it comes to raising yield, I feel like that's just what we get really passionate about, raising yield, but also, raising our profits. We're honestly just trying to do better than what we were, say, last year, or just do better than what we did, previously. So that's why I wanted to preference by saying that I'm not trying to say this in a boastful way, because we did very good this year. If you didn't do that good, that happens. And so I want to just put that out there and make that known. So like I mentioned, our wheat did 108 bushels per acre, and that is a record for us. 3 years ago in 2021 was actually another great year for yields for us. That year we actually had 2 wheat fields, and I think they averaged about 105 bushels per acre across the farm. So we beat that a little bit this year with that. The thing about in 2021 though is our wheat prices were a lot better than what they currently are. So since I'm not going to strictly talk yield, I should say. I'm also going to talk, revenue and a little bit of profit and kind of things that go into this. Kind of wanted to break it down between the wheat, the rye, and the triticale and kind of really discuss what that all looks like. So I mentioned the wheat, what that did, the price that we got at the elevator once we sold that. We delivered that down to an elevator here in locally. It's about 45 minutes to an hour away. They typically have a really good bid. There's usually trucks there, honestly, from, Kansas to South Dakota. And they typically have a pretty good basis or a positive basis. This year, they were actually even. So it's just kind of the way it worked out. But the price that we got when we sold that was about $5.75 a bushel. So essentially what that means for total revenue is about $621 of revenue for the wheat. So let's go to rye next. This was actually our first year raising straight rye. We've raised rye a couple years in the past, but it was a relay rye with soybeans basically underneath of it. So it didn't do as good, which we were not expecting it to do as good. We didn't, treat it the same as we would in this example as straight rye. So this might be beginner's luck getting this yield, but we had 82 bushels of rye per acre, which is really good. There's a lot of other really good rye growers in this area that honestly struggle to get into the 70s. Rye just does not produce as much. Rye is honestly intended to be more of a cover crop. It just doesn't usually yield as good as wheat. And so we are extremely happy with 82 bushels per acre. Now, the price for that, what we're going to use that rye seed for is cover crop seed. We're going to use it for ourselves, and we're probably going to sell some as well. And so, roughly, I'm kind of estimating here the price that we could get for that after we clean that is going to be about $11 per bushel. So that equates to a revenue of about $902 per acre. So let's move on to the triticale next. So the triticale, that's also, like I said, a cross between the rye and wheat. So typically, I'd say it's going to be kind of middle of the road for yield. It's kind of in between on the height of the plant as well. And so there's just kind of a middle of the road between the two. Our triticale this year, to be honest, I was maybe a tick disappointed after I saw the wheat and the rye yields, because we did the wheat first and then we combined the rye, and the triticale was last, just kind of the way things worked out. But the triticale, I'm going to try to keep these all separate here. The triticale did about 75 bushels per acre, which is still very good. And the triticale, that is something that a lot of guys will use for cover crop seed, and it's triticale has a very good feed value. It's something that does not take off quite as fast as rye does in the spring, which can be a benefit if you're using it as a cover crop, especially say like a cover crop in front of corn. It's got a little bit of a lower C to N ratio, carbon to nitrogen ratio. To kind of dive into the weeds just a little bit here, it can be just a very good kind of cover crop because it can break down just maybe a tick faster than your rye will. And like I said, it doesn't take off. It doesn't grow quite as fast. So it's not going to just be this huge biomass of a cover crop in front of corn, which can be sometimes an issue, especially when it comes to sucking some of that moisture out. So there's definitely some benefits. That's kind of why that triticale was created, like I said, a cross between the wheat and the rye. So triticale, like I said, if we wanted to keep that ourselves and use that as our own cover crop, but if we had to go buy that elsewhere, that's kind of where I'm coming up with my revenue here. If we want to go buy that elsewhere, that's actually worth a little bit more, in that we probably have to pay about $14 a bushel for that. So 75 bushels per acre times 14 is about $1,050 in revenue. So overall, triticale actually, from a revenue standpoint, is the winner. Now, when we're talking about the difference in profit on these, they're actually pretty similar to raise when it comes to the expenses that go into this. Just to kind of give you a little bit of context on the practices that we do when it comes to these, is the wheat seed we buy elsewhere. We buy certified wheat seed, special variety. The variety that we used this year was a Westbred 4699, I believe. And then we get a little bit of seed treatment on that. And so that cost a little bit more than, say, like your rye and triticale seed, which this year we basically just planted. It was clean seed, but it was not treated seed. And so it's a little bit cheaper in that regard. The nitrogen is probably a tick less for your rye and your triticale because you're not shooting for the big yields that you are on the wheat. So there's a little bit difference there. But essentially what we're doing with this is, we're planting it at the same time. We're using the same drill, just a little bit of a different treatment on the wheat versus the rye and the triticale. And then after that, we pretty much leave it alone. And hopefully we got a good moisture to get that stuff established in the spring, or basically in the fall, and then we have good growth in the spring. In the spring, once we kind of start to get that green up, the last few years, I'd say we're going on about third, fourth year doing this, is in the springtime, right at green up, usually sometime around the end of March, early April, we'll go in with our sprayer, and we use streamer tips with our nitrogen and sulfur. So we got 32% nitrogen and thiosulfate for liquid sulfur. But this year, what we did different is we added liquid humic. That was kind of the one thing that we did different. I can't say if that necessarily threw our yields this high, but that is one thing that we did different that probably most in the area did not. So whether that was really that big a benefit, it's hard to say, but I'll definitely probably continue to do that, because adding that liquid humic, basically that humic acid is going to kind of help bind to that nitrogen. So one, it doesn't leach, and two, it doesn't volatilize, but then it also makes it more absorbs it a little bit better with the plant, and also decreases out salt load, because when we're doing this at green up, we don't want to burn the leaves of the grasses as it's trying to grow. So I definitely think that helps. And honestly, it's not that expensive. We added 1 pound of this liquid humic 1 ounce per every pound of nitrogen as we were applying it. Essentially what this came out to was about $3.25 per acre just for that humic. And so from there, we do not apply any herbicide to our small grains. Basically, the field stays pretty clean all in all. And so from there, we'll basically watch it. Hopefully it's doing good. And then we'll probably make another fertilizer pass. Basically, we'll do a top dress. And I usually have a co-op or somebody else come in to do that has maybe a narrow tires and then a big spread pattern, so they're not running over as much as maybe say a ground rig, because we're using dry. And at that point, we're putting on a little bit more nitrogen and a little bit of potash with potash to get some of that phosphorus and that out there. And so, excuse me, I'm tripping over my words here. We're trying to get with the potash, we're trying to get the potassium out there as well, and a little bit of sulfur and some of that too. So that's kind of what it comes down to. And then if things are looking good, and this year we had plenty of moisture, which can be good, but can lead to some diseases. And so I'll be honest, I'm really good about raising these crops, but I am not the perfect man that goes out there and crop scouts like I probably should. But we decided it seemed like it was going to be humid conditions, that some diseases could be potentially coming in. So we went ahead and spent the money on a fungicide. We put Mirvis Ace out there and had a helicopter fly that on, so that we weren't running as much over. Didn't have to worry about trying to find a good dry stretch to do that. And with our sprayer, it's just usually tied up that time of year, so it's best just to have somebody else kind of come in and do it. That way we don't have to worry about accidentally having something in the sprayer and killing that small grains, the wheat and all that stuff. So that's kind of the breakdown when it comes to all of that. The one thing I'll mention with these small grains is we do not take out crop insurance, especially on the wheat. We've had it quite a few years now. We've been raising wheat for probably about 10 years now. The way that works is you'd have to have within one section, you'd have to have maybe 3 years of history, or you'd have to use maybe say your county T yields, which in this area are very poor. So we just never felt like we got a good enough bang for a buck to actually buy crop insurance, multi-peril insurance out for the wheat. So we've never spent the money on that. The one thing we do take out is hail insurance, because that can be a detriment to a crop. So we don't want to have to worry about that. So we do take a little bit of hail insurance out, but that's about it. The one thing that's nice about raising these small grains, especially, the wheat, we've been doing that for several years, is it does not take a lot of inputs compared to say like the corn crop. I'm kind of looking at my breakdowns here. The corn crop this year, your inputs going into that, we got about $600 an acre. I mean, that's pretty typical, I'd say. And soybeans is about $330. Where our wheat is actually closer to about, $200. So it's significantly less. All things considered, it's a lot less that goes into it. Now, obviously, you're getting less revenue, but kind of consider what you need to actually, when it comes to maybe getting capital for the year, maybe you just don't put in quite as many corn acres. Maybe you just kind of switch that rotation up. And not to mention, when it comes to wheat, there's definitely a lot that goes into consideration of why you should plant wheat or small grain. I'll keep saying wheat, but essentially this wheat, rye, and triticale, it's all going to kind of do the same for us. And as I did that breakdown, and as I'm looking at it here, and the different revenues, and there wasn't a lot of difference between raising the wheat and the rye and the triticale, only by about $15 per acre in cost difference because of the some of the different fertilizers. The one thing that I'll say is, yes, it would be super easy just to raise a whole bunch of rye, especially at 82 bushels per acre. You're going to make pretty good money at that, especially even on the triticale side. You can make pretty good money on a revenue standpoint. But the thing is, you have to be able to get rid of it. And that's probably why we haven't planted more of it. And we might plant more of it in the future. But you got to have a market for it. And sometimes that's not easy. A lot of times the rye and the triticale are going to be used for cover crops. And I do believe that there's going to be more cover crops being planted in this area. And so that's why I'm hoping to kind of capitalize on some of that a little bit. There are other rye growers in this area as well, which if you work with them, everybody can win. Everybody can succeed. But you got to kind of keep an eye on your market. Keep an eye on where you're at, who's growing what in your area. But for us here in Northeast Nebraska, those are kind of some of the small grains that tend to work pretty well. Now, there are some other people in this area when it comes to small grains growing some oats. And we've actually grown oats in the past. A long time ago, and before we started growing wheat, we grew oats. And the reason we grew oats was because we could use the oats as feed for the hog operation that we had years ago, but we could also utilize getting that crop off midsummer. We had hog barns, and so we need to get out there and apply that manure because our pits would always get full. So that's honestly the reason that we had that small grain. Now, the reason that we started planting wheat was because we looked at the potential of we needed the straw for our cattle operation. We needed the straw, and it was a good place for us to plant a cover crop into and then go graze that. And it was just also kind of a nice switch up in the rotation. We talk about corn soybeans, or maybe corn soybeans if you're kind of a corn on corn person. Well, that can be kind of a good way to build up diseases. And sometimes it's just nice to break that cycle, to throw an extra crop in there. And maybe if you've seen it to where you've had alfalfa, to where you switch up that rotation, that can be very beneficial for next year's crop. So that's where I'm going to kind of shift gears here a little bit. This year, we actually did not bale our straw. This is the first year that we didn't, besides last year. And just kind of a recap on last year, real quick. Last year, our yields were terrible. We had 25 bushel an acre wheat, and we didn't get any straw off of that, so our revenue was hardly anything. And that really hurts when when you basically don't take out crop insurance on that. You've got no way to recover some of that. And so last year was definitely a tough year for our wheat. And so that's why I want to say this year was really nice, kind of that bounce back to have those really good yields come in. And so when it comes to this year, like I said, we did not take the straw. We decided that the revenue we were going to get from the straw versus leaving the straw out there, kind of putting that straw back into the soil, that's an extra carbon out there that if we can plant a good cover crop, keep that soil alive, keep that soil moving, that's going to utilize some of that carbon that's in that straw and kind of feed some of those different microbes out there. And so we felt that was more of a benefit than taking $50 to $70 an acre of straw off. And there are added benefits to taking the straw off. We've done that just so many times in the past. And that's just added revenue there. If you want to try to sell that and add to the bottom line, that definitely helps. But it's also a pain. You got to go through and you got to combine it, and you got to combine it low so you can get all of the straw, drop that in a windrow, and then come back and bale it. Versus this year, we went ahead and just combined it high, spread our straw out, didn't have to worry about if a rain was coming. We just got it done, and it worked very well, I'd say. And so that's just one thing I wanted to mention there. But in the past, we had wheat because it worked well for our operation, and now with the livestock and now we just use it as a cash crop. But more than that, ultimately at the end of the day, is it going to compete with corn and soybeans? Well, it just kind of depends on the year. Because the one thing I will say is when it comes to marketing this, with anything, cash crop, your corn, soybeans, wheat, all of those are traded commodities on the futures board. And so we do work with a marketing advisor that's been a huge asset to us in our operation. And so typically when it comes to wheat, and this has been in the past where same with your corn and soybeans, we're kind of coming on a downfall of prices. A year ago, things were a lot higher than what they are now. We all know this. It's no secret. But usually when you're doing any sort of forward contracting in a down market, you're going to look really smart. Now, in an up market, when you're doing forward contracting, it can be kind of painful to be selling wheat at the elevator when, the elevator price is maybe $9, but your net is only like $7.50 or $8 when you're losing a little bit. Well, that's where it kind of worked out in our favor this year. It's nice to know that, we've been raising wheat for several years now, so you can kind of know that this $5.75, this is pretty average price, all things considered. I'd say that's pretty average. We've sold a lot of wheat in that range. But we've also sold some wheat, in the $6, $7, or $8 range, or even up to $11 at one point in time. And so I knew kind of last year, typically with wheat, they always say you kind of market it out about a year in advance. So I can't remember when it was, but at some point last fall, we actually put some positions on wheat and got very lucky that we essentially, our net price, and I'm not trying to brag here, I'm just saying that it's possible to get higher prices with some sort of marketing advisor, but our net price on our wheat was actually $8.20. So that's a pretty good chunk of change that we picked up there, over $2.25 almost that we picked up on our price just because the futures And just by working with a marketing advisor, kind of knowing what we had in it, knowing that at the time, like, hey, there's more downside risk. We need to put some positions on. We need to do something to protect our downside. And we went ahead and did that. So it definitely feels good to do that and have it pay off like it did this year. And once again, not bragging, just saying that there's a lot of value in working with a marketing advisor in that regard. And so, yes, I just wanted to kind of jump on here and explain all of this. But also real quick, when it comes to deciding on if you wanted to plant some of these things, the one thing to consider is like I mentioned before, it may not necessarily always compete with corn and soybeans, but it takes less to put in. But then the way that we look at it is you are breaking that crop rotation, but the big value that we see in it, especially now, is the cover crop that you're going to get planted into it. There is so much potential in a cover crop that you can plant in end of July's time frame, because that crop's going to grow, and whatever you plant, whether it be for grazing or for us, we're going to plant kind of a pretty diverse mix this year that's going to be the potential for grazing. Since we don't have cows of our own, it's hard for us to rely solely on the income from grazing that. So we're going to plant a very diverse mix out there that has some legumes, some brassicas, some grasses, some warm season grasses, some cool season grasses, all of that. So that way we can graze it. But also the primary function is to increase that soil health, start to fix some nitrogen for our next year's corn crop, because that's the big benefit here, is that it's hard to really account for the benefits that we can do to the soil. It's not necessarily coming to our account right away. That's something that's usually down the road. Kind of the analogy that I like to use when it comes to the soil health side of things and building the soil, and I think it's a really benefit to kind of look at things this way, is when it comes to your soil health and everything that you're doing, is essentially you're trying to build out your balance sheet, but not necessarily your cash flow. Your cash flow might take a little bit of a hit, but essentially you're going to build that asset, that soil, that ground that you have, or even if you rent it, you're going to try to build that up. So long term, that's going to pay you off down the road. So that's kind of why I try to look at that. It's essentially trying to build your balance sheet versus your cash flow. This year, you may not necessarily get all of that back in the form of cash into your account, but down the road, the idea is to start these practices so that way they snowball and eventually they catch up and you're having, better yields. There's lots of benefits with the soil that are going to take place because of this diverse cover crop and everything that it can do. There's so many benefits between, water infiltration, water holding capacity, feeding the microbes that are out there, increasing the organic matter, recycling nutrients. I could go on, not to mention just even covering the soil the entire time, and then trying to get some livestock out there, trying to, get some more diversity out there. As you can tell, I'm pretty passionate. I've got a lot of experience with this, but also this is something that I truly enjoy. I enjoy it partially because not many people do it in our area, but the ones that do are a lot of fun to talk to and learn from. I just wanted to jump on here and kind of share what our experiences were and what some of the things that we were going through in these different small grains and kind of how we got along. And I would definitely advise you, if you have this something that interests you, or maybe this was a value to you, reach out. I enjoy talking about this stuff. I'd love to have a conversation about this. And I'll try to kind of sneak some of these episodes in here, kind of here and there, so we can kind of have some fun with talking about these different topics. And it definitely relates to the business side of things, because on a real quick note here, the nice thing about wheat versus some of these other crops is it is kind of a different timing of cash flow. So that can really help for the cash flow needs of different timings of cash flow. And, when we're planting at different expenses or different times of year versus your standard corn and soybeans. And so there's definitely benefits there. Do your due diligence. The one thing I will say when it comes to trying different practices is don't bet your farm on this. Try small acreages, try to get by with what you can and learn, and just get out there and try something new. Because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So with that, try something new and get after it. And I look forward to hearing from you and continuing this discussion. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @GarrettRuskamp or on Facebook And join me next time for more conviction through clarity.